I didn't plan for any of it to happen. That's the part I keep coming back to. Like if I repeated it enough times, it might start to feel true. But the truth is messier than that. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't one decision, one moment, one reckless night. It was a series of small things that didn't feel wrong until suddenly they were. My mom married Daniel when I was 22. I had already moved out by then, or at least I told everyone I had. In reality, I was bouncing between a tiny apartment with peeling paint and weekends back at my mom's place whenever things got too quiet or too expensive. She met him through work. He was older than her by maybe 5 years, tall, clean-cut, the kind of man who wore button-down shirts even on weekends, the kind of guy who fixed things without being asked. I remember the first time I met him. He shook my hand like I was someone he respected, not just his girlfriend's daughter. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, smiling like he meant it. And for some reason, that made me nervous. At the wedding, everything felt rushed. My mom was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since I was a kid. I wanted to be happy for her, I really did. She deserved something good. But standing there, watching them say their vows, I felt like I was being replaced. Not in some dramatic way, just quietly, like I was no longer the center of her world. Daniel tried with me, he really did. He'd ask about my job, my friends, my plans. He'd listen in a way most people didn't. Not distracted, not waiting for his turn to talk. Just present. That alone made him different. At first, I kept my distance. I'd come over for dinner, sit through polite conversations, then leave early with some excuse about work. But over time, it got harder to keep that wall up. He had this calm energy about him that made you feel safe, like nothing bad could happen if he was around. The first time things shifted, it was so small I almost didn't notice. My mom had to work late, and I had come by to pick up some old boxes for my room. Daniel was home alone, in the garage, working on something under the hood of his car. The radio was playing low, some classic rock station. I stood there for a second, watching him, before he noticed me. "Hey," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't hear you pull in." "Yeah, I just got here," I said. "Mom said I could grab my stuff." "She did. You want help?" I shook my head. "I got it." But I didn't go inside right away. I don't know why. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching him work. There was something strangely comforting about it. The way he focused, the way he moved, it felt normal. "You ever worked on a car before?" he asked without looking up. I laughed. "No, I can barely change a tire." "Well, that's a problem," he said, smiling slightly. "Come here." I hesitated for a second, then walked over. He stepped aside, letting me look under the hood. He started explaining things, simple stuff, really, but the way he said it made me feel like I was learning something important, like he actually wanted me to understand. At one point, I leaned in too close, and our shoulders brushed. It was nothing, accidental, but I felt it, a spark, quick and sharp, like static electricity. I pulled back immediately, pretending to be more interested in what he was saying than I actually was. "Sorry," I said. "It's fine," he replied, but his voice had shifted just slightly. We didn't talk about it. There was nothing to talk about. But something had changed. I could feel it. After that, I started coming over more often. At first, I told myself it was to see my mom, but she was busy a lot. Work, friends, errands. And somehow, I always ended up talking to Daniel. We'd sit in the kitchen late at night, just talking about random things. Movies, music, life. He told me stories about when he was younger, mistakes he'd made, things he wished he'd done differently. And I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had with anyone else. One night, after a couple glasses of wine, I told him about my last relationship, how it ended, how it made me feel like I wasn't enough. "That guy was an idiot," he said, without hesitation. I laughed softly. "You don't even know him." "I don't need to," he replied, looking straight at me. "Anyone who makes you feel like that doesn't deserve you." The way he said it, it hit something in me, something I didn't realize I needed. "Thanks," I said, quietly. There was a pause, not awkward, just heavy, like something was sitting between us, waiting to be acknowledged. "You're easy to talk to," I added, trying to break the moment. "So are you," he said. Our eyes met, and for a second, everything else faded. The room, the noise, the world outside. It was just us. I looked away first. That night, I went home and couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. The way he looked at me, the things he said. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The next few weeks were complicated. Nothing happened, not physically. But emotionally, things were shifting in a way I couldn't control. We started texting. At first, it was innocent. He'd send me a joke or ask how my day was. I'd reply and the conversation would just continue, sometimes for hours. I didn't tell my mom. I told myself there was nothing to tell. It wasn't like we were doing anything wrong. We were just talking. But I started hiding it, deleting messages, turning my phone screen away when she was around. Little things that didn't feel like a big deal individually, but together they added up. One afternoon, I came over unannounced. I had a key, so I let myself in. The house was quiet. I called out, but no one answered. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, looking exhausted. "Hey," I said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, didn't expect you." "Yeah, I just needed to get out of my place for a bit." He nodded like he understood more than I was saying. "Everything okay?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just one of those days." He patted the seat next to him. "Come sit." I hesitated for a second, then walked over and sat down. Not too close, just enough. For a while, we didn't say anything. We just sat there in silence. And somehow it didn't feel awkward. It felt right. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Your mom and I had a fight this morning." I turned to him. "Really? About what?" "Nothing important," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "Doesn't sound like nothing," I replied. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, sometimes it feels like we're on different pages." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. Instead, I did something I hadn't planned, something I still don't fully understand. I reached out and touched his hand. It was a simple gesture, meant to be comforting. That's what I told myself. But the moment our skin made contact, everything changed. He didn't pull away, neither did I. We just sat there, hands touching, both of us pretending it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. I could feel my heart racing, my thoughts spinning. I knew this was a line, a clear, undeniable line, and we were crossing it. Slowly, he turned his hand, his fingers brushing against mine. Not gripping, not holding. Just there. I should have pulled away. I didn't.
"Maybe I should go," I said, even though I didn't move. "Yeah," he replied, just as quietly. "Maybe." But neither of us did. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. I could feel it building, like a storm about to break. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, something dangerous, something that mirrored exactly what I was feeling. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just playing with a line anymore. We were about to erase it completely. I wish I could say I walked out right then, that I pulled my hand away, laughed it off, made some excuse about needing to be somewhere, and never let it go any further. That would have been the version of me I used to believe I was, the one who knew where the line was and respected it. But I didn't move. Neither did he. We just stayed there, our hands barely touching, like if we didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't count, like we could pretend it was still innocent. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't comfortable anymore. It was charged. Every breath felt louder. Every small movement felt amplified. "I shouldn't have said that," he muttered finally, his voice low. "Said what?" I asked, even though I knew he didn't mean words. He shook his head slightly. "About your mom, about us." I swallowed. "It's okay. You didn't say anything wrong." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't about what he said. It was about what was happening. His hand shifted again, this time more deliberately. His fingers curled slightly around mine, not enough to fully hold, but enough that it wasn't accidental anymore. My chest tightened. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. I could have answered 100 different ways. I could have said I didn't know. I could have made a joke. I could have stood up and left. Instead, I told the truth. Because I don't want to leave. The second the words left my mouth, everything felt irreversible. He let out a slow breath, like he'd been holding it in for too long. Then he turned toward me fully, his body facing mine. I could feel the shift, the space between us shrinking, even though neither of us had actually moved that much. "This is a bad idea," he said. "I know. We shouldn't be doing this." "I know," I repeated, but my voice didn't sound convincing anymore. Another silence, longer this time. He was searching my face, like he was trying to find a reason to stop. I think I was doing the same thing, except all I found was confirmation of what I already felt. And then it happened. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, careful, like he was giving me every chance to stop him. He leaned in just slightly. I didn't pull away. That was all the permission he needed. The first time he kissed me, it was hesitant, soft, almost unsure, like he was touching something he already knew he shouldn't be touching. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My hand tightened around his without me even realizing it. I should have stopped it right there, but I didn't. I kissed him back.
The moment that happened, something snapped. Whatever restraint was left between us disappeared. The hesitation turned into something deeper, heavier. His hand moved from mine to my wrist, then up my arm, like he needed to feel that I was actually there. I could feel everything, his breath, his heartbeat, the tension in his body that matched mine perfectly. It was overwhelming, in the worst and best way, at the same time. Then suddenly he pulled back, hard, like he'd just remembered where he was. "What are we doing?" he said, almost to himself. I was breathing too fast to answer right away. My lips still felt like they were burning. "I don't know," I admitted. He stood up, running his hands through his hair, pacing a few steps away like he needed distance from me. "This can't happen again," he said firmly, but his voice didn't fully believe it. I nodded, even though something in my chest tightened at the thought. Yeah, it shouldn't have happened at all. We both knew that was a lie. He looked at me again, and for a second I thought he might come back, might ignore everything he just said, but he didn't. "You should go," he said quietly. This time I did stand up. My legs felt unsteady, like I wasn't fully grounded in reality. I grabbed my bag, avoiding his eyes. "Yeah, I should." I walked to the door, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it might echo through the house. My hand was on the handle when I paused. I don't know why I turned around, but I did. He was still standing there, watching me. The look on his face, it wasn't just guilt. It wasn't just regret. It was something deeper, something that made leaving feel harder than it should have. "Daniel," I started, but I didn't know what I was going to say. He shook his head slightly. "Don't." So I didn't. I left. The drive back to my apartment felt like a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt, but I barely noticed. My mind kept replaying everything. The way he looked at me, the way he kissed me, the way he said my name without actually saying it. I kept telling myself it was a mistake, a one-time thing, something we'd both forget about. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something I'd been missing without even realizing it. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my phone sitting on the nightstand next to me, like it was calling me. I told myself not to reach for it. I told myself not to text him. I lasted until 2:17 a.m. "I'm sorry." That's all I sent. Simple, safe, neutral. At least that's what I told myself. He didn't reply right away. Minutes passed, then more. I started to think maybe he wouldn't respond at all. Maybe that was for the best. Then my phone lit up. "You don't have anything to be sorry for." My chest tightened when I read it. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "We shouldn't have done that." This time his response came faster. "I know." Another pause. Another moment where I could have stopped. I didn't. But I don't regret it. The second I sent it, I felt my heart start racing again. There was no taking that back. No pretending anymore. His reply took longer this time. Long enough that I started to feel nervous. Then finally, it came. "Neither do I." That was it. That was the moment everything truly crossed the line. Because after that, we didn't pretend anymore. The next few days were different. Subtle on the outside, but completely changed underneath. My mom had no idea. She went about her routine like nothing had shifted, like her world was still exactly the same. Meanwhile, mine felt like it was spinning out of control. Daniel and I didn't talk about what happened when she was around. We acted normal. Too normal, probably. Careful with our words. Careful with our distance. But every now and then, our eyes would meet, and it was like everything we were hiding was right there on the surface. And when we weren't around her, that's when it got harder. The text became more frequent, less guarded. What started as short, safe messages turned into long conversations again. But now there was an edge to them, a tension that wasn't there before. "You okay?" he'd ask. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" I'd hesitate before answering. "You know what?"
There was a moment one night where I almost told my mom everything. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. She was talking about work, about some issue with a coworker, and I wasn't really listening. I was watching her, really watching her. She looked happy, comfortable, safe, and I realized I was about to destroy that. The guilt hit me so hard I had to look away. "You okay?"
she asked, noticing my silence. Yeah, I said quickly, just tired. She smiled. You've been coming around a lot more lately. I like it. That made it worse, because the real reason I was there had nothing to do with her anymore. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed. I told myself I was just going to sit for a bit, maybe watch some TV, then leave. But I knew that wasn't the truth. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. You're still here, he said quietly from the hallway. I didn't turn around right away. Yeah, you should go. You said that last time too. There was a pause. Then I felt him walk closer. You didn't listen then either. I turned to face him. Are you going to make me this time? The look in his eyes answered that question before he even spoke. No. And just like that, whatever thin line we were pretending still existed disappeared completely. I don't remember who moved first that night. I've tried to replay it in my head so many times, hoping I could pinpoint the exact second where everything went from wrong to completely irreversible, but it all blurs together now. What I do remember is how quiet the house was, the kind of silence that feels louder than noise, like it's watching you, waiting to see what you'll do. My mom was asleep down the hall. That fact sat in the back of my mind the entire time, like a warning I kept choosing to ignore. He was standing just a few feet away from me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body but not touching me yet. That space between us felt heavier than anything, like stepping into it would mean there was no going back. You shouldn't be here, he said again, but softer this time. Not like a warning, more like he was trying to convince himself. Then why aren't you making me leave? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to my lips for just a second, and that was enough. Because I don't want to, he admitted. That was it. That was the moment everything broke. I closed the distance between us. This time there was no hesitation, no testing, no pretending. The second our lips met, it felt different from before. Deeper, more certain, more dangerous. His hands moved immediately, like he'd already imagined this too many times to count. One slid around the other coming up to my neck, holding me there like he didn't trust himself to let go. And I didn't want him to. I felt everything all at once. The adrenaline, the guilt, the need, the confusion. It all mixed together into something overwhelming. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to think, to remember who he was, who I was, what this meant. But my body didn't care. My body leaned into him. We stumbled slightly as he backed me up, not breaking the kiss, until I felt the edge of the kitchen counter press into my lower back. It should have snapped me back to reality. It didn't. Tell me to stop, he said against my lips, his voice strained. I knew what he was asking. He was giving me one last out, one last chance to pull us both back from this. I didn't take it. I don't want you to, I whispered. The second I said that, something shifted in him completely. Whatever control he'd been holding on to was gone. His grip tightened, his movements more certain, like he'd finally allowed himself to feel everything he'd been pushing down. Every second felt intense, too intense, like we were both aware of how wrong it was, and that awareness only made it stronger. There was something about the secrecy, the risk, the fact that we weren't supposed to want this. It made everything sharper. At one point, I heard a sound from down the hall. We both froze instantly. My heart stopped, literally stopped. I could feel it in my chest, like everything inside me just paused. We pulled apart just enough to listen. Silence, no footsteps, no movement, just the house settling. She's asleep, he said quietly, but his voice had that edge of fear in it now. We need to stop, I said, but I didn't move away. Yeah, he agreed. Neither of us moved. Instead, after a few seconds, he kissed me again. That should tell you everything about how far gone we already were. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time didn't feel real anymore. Minutes could have been hours. It all blended together into this one long moment where nothing else existed, except us and the fact that we were crossing a line we both knew we could never uncross. Eventually, reality did catch up. Not because we stopped wanting it, but because we had to. He pulled back first this time, breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine. This can't keep happening, he said. The words sounded familiar, like something we'd already said and already ignored. I let out a shaky breath. I know. You're my wife's daughter, he added,
like saying it out loud would finally make it real enough to stop. That one hit harder than anything else, not because I didn't already know it, but because hearing it framed like that forced me to see it from the outside, to see how it looked, how wrong it was. I stepped back slightly, creating just enough space to think. "We're not even related," I said, and the second the words came out, I hated myself for them, because I wasn't trying to stop it anymore. I was justifying it. His expression changed when I said that. Not relief, not agreement, something more complicated. "That doesn't make it okay," he said. "No," I admitted. "It doesn't." Another silence. Then, quieter this time, almost like I wasn't fully aware I was saying it. "But it doesn't make me want it any less." That was the most honest thing I'd said since this all started, and it was also the most dangerous. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure out if I really meant it. I didn't look away. "I should go," I said finally, even though every part of me resisted the idea. "Yeah," he said again, but there was something hollow in his voice now. I grabbed my bag, my hands slightly shaky. This time, when I walked to the door, I didn't turn around, because I knew if I did, I wouldn't leave. The drive home felt different from the last time, heavier, not because I regretted it, but because now there was no pretending anymore, no gray area. No, maybe it was just a moment. This was real, and it was happening. The next morning, I woke up to a text from him. "I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back exactly what I was feeling. "Me neither." That became our pattern. We didn't talk about stopping anymore. We didn't pretend it wasn't happening. We just existed in it, quietly, carefully, like we were both waiting for something to force us to stop. But nothing did. Days turned into a week turned into more. We found moments, small ones at first. A look across the room, a brush of hands when my mom wasn't paying attention, a second too long standing too close in the kitchen. Then it escalated. Afternoons when she was at work, excuses to come over, locked doors. Every time, we told ourselves it would be the last.
And every time, it wasn't. The worst part wasn't even the secrecy. It was how normal it started to feel. That's the part that still messes with me the most. How something so wrong could start to feel so natural. Like it had always been there, just waiting for us to acknowledge it. I started noticing things about him I hadn't before. The way he laughed when he was genuinely amused. The way his voice softened when he talked about things that mattered to him. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And he noticed things about me too. "You do that thing," he said one afternoon. "What thing?" "When you're nervous, you tuck your hair behind your ear like 5 times in a row." I laughed. "I do not." "You just did it," he said, smiling. Moments like that made it worse, because it wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, and that's what made it dangerous in a completely different way. One evening, I was over for dinner again. My mom was in a great mood, talking about a weekend trip she wanted us all to take together, somewhere upstate, a cabin maybe, quiet, relaxing. "You should come," she said to me. "It'll be good for all of us." I froze for a second. All of us. If she only knew. "I'll think about it," I said. Daniel didn't say anything. He just sat there, eating, avoiding my eyes for once. That was new. After dinner, I helped her clean up. We stood side by side at the sink, just like we had 100 times before. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal, until she said something that made my stomach drop. "You seem happier lately," she said casually. I forced a smile. "Do I?" "Yeah," she said. "I like seeing you like this." I nodded, unable to speak. Because the reason I was happier was the exact thing that would destroy her if she found out. That night when I left, Daniel didn't come to the door. He didn't text me either. Not that night, not the next morning. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something different. Not guilt, not desire, fear. Because something had changed, and I had a feeling I wasn't the only one who felt it. The silence stretched longer than I expected. At first, I told myself it was nothing. People get busy, people need space. After everything that had been happening, it made sense that maybe he needed time to think, to reset, to figure out what this even was. But by the second day, that explanation started to feel thin.
I checked my phone more than I wanted to admit. Every notification made my chest tighten. Every time it wasn't him, I felt this quiet drop in my stomach that I couldn't shake. I didn't text him, not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared of what it would mean if he didn't reply. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went over. I didn't tell my mom, I didn't text ahead. I just drove there, my thoughts racing the entire time, trying to prepare myself for every possible version of what I might walk into. Maybe he'd act normal. Maybe he'd avoid me. Maybe he'd regret everything. That last one sat the heaviest. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a minute, staring at the house like it was something unfamiliar. It looked exactly the same as it always did. Quiet, clean, ordinary. Nothing about it suggested the kind of secret it was holding. I walked up and let myself in. "Mom?" I called out. No answer. I already knew she was at work. I had checked her schedule earlier, without really admitting to myself why. I stepped further inside. "Daniel?" There was a pause, then his voice came from the living room. "Yeah." Just that. No warmth, no surprise. Just acknowledgement. My chest tightened as I walked toward him. He was sitting on the couch, leaning forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. There was something tense about the way he held himself, like he was carrying something heavy. When he looked up at me, there was no smile. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey." I stood there for a second, not sure what to do with myself. The energy between us felt completely different from before. Not gone, just buried under something thicker. "You've been quiet," I said finally. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been expecting that. "Yeah." "That's it?" I asked, a little sharper than I meant to. He leaned back slightly, running a hand over his face. "What do you want me to say?" I crossed my arms, more to ground myself than anything. "I don't know. Something. Anything. You just disappeared." "I didn't disappear," he said, but there was no real conviction in it. "You stopped talking to me." I needed to. That stung more than I expected. "Why?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it clearly this time. Conflict. Not just guilt, not just fear, something deeper. "Because this isn't just something small," he said. "It's not just something we can pretend didn't happen." "I'm not pretending," I replied. "I know," he said quietly. "That's the problem." That hit harder than anything else he'd said so far. I took a step closer without really thinking about it. "Then what are you saying? That you regret it?" He didn't answer right away. And that silence told me everything. I felt something twist in my chest. "Wow. It's not like that," he said quickly. "Then what is it like?" I pushed. He stood up then, like sitting still wasn't an option anymore. "It's complicated." I let out a short, almost bitter laugh. "Yeah, I think we passed complicated a while ago." "That's exactly my point," he said, his voice rising slightly. "This has gone too far." "And whose fault is that?" I shot back. The second the words came out, I regretted them. Because the truth was, it wasn't just him. It was both of us. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "This isn't about blame." "It feels like it is," I said, softer now. Another pause. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. "I care about you." It should have felt good to hear that. Instead, it made everything worse. "Then why are you acting like this?" I asked. "Because I also care about your mom," he said. That landed like a weight dropping straight into my stomach. Of course he did. Of course he cared about her. That was the whole problem. I looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. "So what, this is just over then?" "I didn't say that," he replied. "Then what are you saying?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me he didn't have a clean answer. "I'm saying we need to slow down," he said finally. "We need to think." I shook my head slightly. "We've been thinking, this whole time." "Not like this," he said. "Not with consequences." The word hung there between us. Consequences. That was new. Before, everything had been about the moment. The feeling. The pull we couldn't ignore. Now suddenly there was something else. Reality. "What changed?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked a few steps away, like he needed distance again. Then he said it. She asked me if something was wrong. My heart stopped. What? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This morning, he continued. She said I've been distant, that I've been acting different. I felt the room tilt slightly. What did you say? I told her I was distressed, he replied. Work stuff. Did she believe you? I don't know.
That uncertainty was worse than anything else, because it meant there was already a crack, and we both knew what happens when cracks start to spread. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady myself. So what, now we just pretend nothing's happening? That might be the only option, he said. I looked at him sharply. You don't actually believe that. I don't know what I believe right now, he admitted. That honesty, it was frustrating, but it was also real, and that's what made it hard to fight. I took another step closer, closing the space between us again, even though I knew I shouldn't. You said you care about me, I said. I do. Then don't push me away like I'm something you need to fix. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not what I'm doing. It feels like it is. Another silence. This one felt heavier than all the others, because now we weren't just fighting the situation, we were fighting each other. I'm not saying this means nothing, he said finally. I'm saying it means too much. That stopped me, because I understood exactly what he meant, and I hated that I did. Before I could respond, we both heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Everything inside me froze. He turned his head toward the window, his entire body going tense. She's home early, he said, his voice low, tight. My heart started pounding instantly, faster than I thought was possible. Why would she be home early? I whispered. I don't know. We stood there for a split second, both of us trying to process what this meant. Then everything moved at once. Go, he said quickly. Now. I grabbed my bag, my hand shaking as I rushed toward the door. My mind was spinning, trying to stay ahead of the situation, trying to act normal before I even knew what normal looked like anymore. I reached the door just as I heard it open from the outside. And then I froze, because she was standing right there. My mom. Her eyes moved from me to the inside of the house, then past me, toward where Daniel was standing. For a second, no one said anything, but something shifted in her expression. Not confusion, not exactly. Something sharper, something that made my chest tighten instantly. You're here, she said slowly. Yeah, I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. I just stopped by. Her eyes stayed on me a second longer than usual. Then she stepped inside. Funny, she said, setting her back down. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't plan it, I said quickly. She nodded slightly. Then her gaze shifted again, to him. And in that moment, I felt it. That quiet, terrifying feeling that maybe, just maybe, she already knew something wasn't right.